triggered or permanent. It's not a video game. The animals die when you shoot them. It's not always pretty. Like, I think that more children should learn how to shoot and learn how to hunt. But if any politician tells you that he supports your Second Amendment because they like to duck hunt, you need to find another person to vote for. Because the Second Amendment is not about duck hunting, okay? It's your insurance policy. If everything else goes to hell in a handbasket, if things devolve into a dictatorship, if they've rigged all the elections and you have no voice, that is your one recourse to reestablish the Constitution. And so even though it's the Second Amendment, I think it's the most important amendment. Another one of my favorite amendments, by the way, I have to say this, is the Ninth Amendment. And so if you're thinking in your head, okay, what's the Ninth Amendment? It doesn't get mentioned very often. When they came up with the Bill of Rights, there were some people that were really worried. You know what? This is kind of ridiculous to list an exhaustive list of our rights, because we've got more than 8 or 10 rights. If we list them, the danger is that people assume that the government can take away our other rights. And so there were a lot of people who were actually against even enumerating certain rights because they feared it would be to the detriment of all your other rights. So they put in the Ninth Amendment to appease those folks, and I would have probably been one of them. And so the Ninth Amendment says, and I'll paraphrase here, not like Adam Schiff paraphrased a phone call, but with the President Trump had with the Ukraine, but I will paraphrase it faithfully, and that is that the Ninth Amendment says we've listed some rights here, but just because we listed them doesn't mean that's an exhaustive list. As a matter of fact, you've got all the other rights. Like, it doesn't have to be on this list to be a right. You have all of the other rights. This list that we're making, the Constitution is about things that the government can't do to you. It's not a list of rights that you have. And that's what the Ninth Amendment is about. So if I wanted to be caucus or chairman of another caucus, maybe I should start a Ninth Amendment caucus. But anyways, I like being chairman of the Second Amendment caucus. And I run it a little differently than the Freedom Caucus. I run it a little differently than the other caucuses. And these caucuses, they get together, and the congressmen go around in a circle, and they all trying to show each other how smart they are. And then at the end of it, these are just exhausting. This is why I don't go to these caucuses, right? You don't get smarter by talking to politicians. And now you're saying, why should I even listen to you at this point? I'm getting dumber by the second. So the way I do the caucus is I bring in somebody who's an expert, and they speak to us, and then we get to ask questions of them. So the people that I brought in are like Dick Heller, the guy who won the DC versus Heller Second Amendment case. Just to recap, there were a lot of people that said, oh, the Second Amendment's about a militia. Doesn't apply to all the people. He won the landmark case that says, no, this is unconnected to the militia. Everybody, every person in the United States has the right to keep and bear arms. So I brought him in to speak. Then I brought his lawyer in to speak, who won that case and the McDonald versus Chicago case, which took the Heller case and said, you know what, the Second Amendment doesn't just apply to the federal government, it applies to the states. And that was a big deal, because you would think the 14th Amendment took care of that. When the 14th Amendment says that nobody can deprive you of your basic rights. Well, and so fairly quickly they said, well, okay, that includes the First Amendment and that includes some of these other amendments, but they left out the Second Amendment until like 2010. It's the last amendment that was incorporated to apply to the state. So I brought the lawyer in to explain that to these congressmen. I brought in John Lott, who's written 9 books. You've got Bloomberg over here, who spends about $100 million every year running a campaign against guns. Okay, he's trying to demonize guns and gun owners. He's spending insane money. Then you got one little guy over here, John Lott, who does the actual research. who digs into the data. He's written 9 books, and he's almost like single-handedly kept the Bloomberg narrative from becoming the official narrative by counteracting it with, not with emotion, but with facts. So I brought him in to speak. So anyways, that's what I do with the Second Amendment Caucus. Just some other quick stuff. Usually I tell a lot of jokes. I'm being pretty serious here tonight because you all are serious people. I mean, seriously. Somebody said it. Dwayne, was that you?
That was me.
Okay. I might have been, by the way, I might have been in that group of people during the State of the Union that started the chant, 4 more years, 4 more years. Because did you all watch the State of the Union?
Yes.
I'll tell you how good it was. It was so good, I stood up and clapped for stuff I'm pretty sure I'm not going to vote for. But I'm looking at some of the guys and gals where we started the 4 more years chant. We're like, really? Is that constitutional? Should we be voting like universal child care? Honestly, I think parents need to take care of their children, and the government doesn't need to tell you how to do it. And once we ask the government to do it for everybody, that's a very slippery slope.
Yes.
But I stood up and clapped because the Democrats were booing. You know, I got carried away. Anyways, and then by the way, that's my approach to this campaign, and that's my approach to my service in Congress right now. I support this president. Okay, when he does something great, and he's done so many great things, I support him. And if I disagree with him, I'll tell him. I mean, I've had phone calls with him. I had a phone call with him on the Republican version of Obamacare. Thank the Lord that did not pass. Can you imagine? Every one of you in this room, by association with the Republican Party, would be blamed for everything that's wrong with health care right now. Oh, because at that time, the Republicans thought we should own it, the Republicans in D.C. By the way, we voted they say 43 times to repeal Obamacare. Now, some of those were before I got there, but I'm pretty sure I got to vote at least 24 times to repeal Obamacare. And then when we got the White House and the Senate and the House, they didn't vote to repeal Obamacare. What the vote was to repeal mandates, penalties, subsidies, and bailouts with mandates, penalties, subsidies, and bailouts. Our bill had all of that stuff in it. All of the stuff you don't like about Obamacare was in the Republican version of the bill. And I might have swallowed really hard and voted for it if it had done one thing. If it had legalized affordable insurance. But it didn't. And I knew the price of insurance was not going to go down. Because used to, the insurance companies could say, you know what? You're pretty healthy. You can buy insurance cheaper than your neighbor. You can't do that anymore. They put you in a bracket, and now everybody has to pay the same price. And the Republican version of the bill was going to keep that defect. So when the president called me, and this was a pretty fun phone call. This was the first time he called me. He doesn't call like when Mike Pence calls, his secretary calls my secretary, they set it up, you know it's coming, it comes in on the landline, hey, Mr. Vice President. When the president calls, it comes in on my cell phone. Like, I want to know who gave him my number. But then I'm like, well, if you had a president who couldn't figure out your number, it's probably not the right president. So I pick up the phone, and it's oh, hey, Mr. President. And on the Obamacare vote, somebody said we should tear out Obamacare root and branch, and I agreed with that. But this version was, as Chris McCain says, it was prune and replant. Okay, it wasn't root and branch. So when the president called me to ask me to vote for it, he hadn't read it. Okay, he was told, we got this good bill, we've been working on this, now you just need to whip a few folks into voting for it. The first thing he told me was, I'm pretty popular in Kentucky. And I said, I know that. He said, maybe it's just because I ran against Crooked Hillary. And I'm like, did he just call her Crooked Hillary on a personal phone call? He is what you see is what you get, okay? He's not two different people. He's the same person in person as he is on Twitter and in public. Well, maybe not on Twitter, okay. So I said, he said, maybe it's because I ran against Crooked Hillary. And I said, Mr. President, it's not because of who you ran against. The people in Kentucky genuinely love you. And it said, and the good news is I got 6 points more than you in my election. So, because obviously the implied message was he was really popular and Air Force One might be at CBG next week, you know. So anyways, we had a good conversation, and I always try to use that opportunity with the president when he calls me about something to talk about something I care about. And so I talked to him about the tax reform bill that was being discussed. Paul Ryan had a bill that actually didn't cut a penny of revenue to the federal government. All it did was move the tax burden around. And so I thought, this would be a good topic to bring up with the president. So I said, before you go, Mr. President, let me tell you, I like your tax bill so much better than the House tax bill. And it got real quiet. I think he chased Reince Priebus out of the room. Because I know there's well, after Vendeman and all them, you know there must be 20 people listening to these phone calls. So it got real quiet, and I'm sure he chased some people out of the room, and then he says, let me tell you the problem with Paul's bill. He was talking about Paul Ryan. I said, what's that? Half the people hate it already. And I said, yeah, that's because half the people's taxes are going up, and half the people's taxes are going down. And then he said, let me tell you the other problem with it. It's too complicated. And he was right. And do you remember, Paul Ryan called it tax reform, and Donald Trump called it tax cut. And they kept telling him, don't call it the tax cut bill. And people would pull him off the set and say, especially Rand Paul, you know, it doesn't really cut taxes. And by the way, Mick Mulvaney was in the room when Rand Paul told Donald Trump that. And he turned to Mick Mulvaney and said, is what he's saying right? Because he was OMB director at the time. He's like, yeah, he's right. What? Anyways, so so I have to give the president credit that we actually got a tax cut bill because of that. And I was encouraging him at the time to do that, to go with his bill and not the House bill. And thank goodness that we did. Because that's why, until this virus hit, the economy is booming. And the economy is going to come back. The economy is going to be great because the president has reduced regulations, and he's lowered taxes. He's made it easier to do business here. And he's also getting us back into fair trade, which I mean, a lot of people have a problem with, but I totally approve of what he's doing there. So, let's see. Maybe I should tell a few jokes before I wrap up here. Has everybody read the Green New Deal? By the way, I was sitting with AOC yesterday. I know my wife's like, you gotta quit telling people you talk to her. She wants me to call her Alex, okay? Because I didn't know whether to call her AOC or Alexandria. She's like, oh, just call me Alex. Anyways, unlike Adam Schiff, who I don't even want to talk about the weather with, I went up to AOC the first day I saw her on the floor, and I said, I heard you are making Nancy Pelosi's life difficult. If you want help with that, I'm here for you. I swear that's the first thing I told her. And I was with this FISA bill, you know, it was actually Nancy Pelosi who didn't want to reform any of this, and who worked with, you know, some Republicans who weren't the best and got this passed. So I was talking to her yesterday. But back to her bill. It's 14 pages long, the Green New Deal. I read it from front to back twice. It's not like these 6,000 page bills. And after I got done with it the second time, I realized why it's 14 pages. You all know why it's 14 pages? There's only 64 crayons in a box. They get dull quick. And then finally, the last, because I want this to be interactive, I'll take a few questions from you all. But one more quick story. I wish Nancy Pelosi would mind her own business. She's trying to, they renamed the Oversight and Government Reform Committee that I serve on with Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows. They renamed it, instead of Oversight and Government Reform, they named it Oversight and Reform. What's the message there? They're not about reforming the government and making it more efficient or eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. They want to reform private industry. They want the government to come after businesses. That's why they took out the G in OGR. Now the committee is just the OR committee. But I wish she would mind her own business. She's even making her own bourbon now. Yeah. I don't think it's going to do very well, though. As you all know, her brand is zero proof. All right. I would take a few questions now from you all. Yes?
Before I ask you a question, I do want to thank you for trying to promote taking the taxes away from Social Security.
Yeah, the double taxation on.
Yes,
Let me just quickly talk about that.
Okay.
You're taxed, your income is taxed before it goes into Social Security. I didn't even know that. I filled out tax forms. I used to do TurboTax. Then my taxes got too complicated. But and I never realized that that is after tax income that goes into Social Security. Now when you're paid your Social Security back when you retire, they tax you again if you're over a certain amount. Now it used to be called soaking the rich, right? Because when they did that in 1983, it only applied to 5% of Social Security recipients. Now it applies to 50% of Social Security recipients. Basically, if you've done the responsible thing and have any other sort of income in your retirement age, you will be over that threshold and you will start paying taxes on your Social Security. So the bill that I introduced wouldn't just eliminate that tax, it would eliminate the question on your tax form. You wouldn't even have to report your Social Security benefit on their tax form. So,
It's wonderful.
and I've got 30 co-sponsors now. It was bipartisan, but then Jeff Van Drew switched to Republican, but then I got another Democrat, so it's bipartisan again. Okay.
That's good. My question is, RMDs. Now you can tell I evidently made 70 and a half. The required minimum distribution out of your 401k or other traditional IRAs. It's figured on what the value of your account is the last day of the year in 2019. Well, you know the stock market is the pits. And they delayed it for people who make 70 and a half this year, but that's not me. So I missed it by a year. Now we have to pay the full amount of our, we can't delay it. I mean, is there anything you can do if the stock market stays this bad to help everybody who's gonna have to take a required minimum distribution?
So she's talking about the required minimum distributions, RMDs, everything's an acronym. There's weapons of mass distraction too. That's what they use, the WMD, weapon of mass distraction. They used the coronavirus to reauthorize the Patriot Act this week. So, but she's talking about RMDs, required minimum distribution. I'll look into that. She's saying basically the formula should change. And that's something reasonable I think Congress could do. That we're not giving you any money, we're letting you have your own money, right? Without penalizing you for saving up for your retirement. So that's something I'll take back to DC and see if we can get that in there.
I called since the House passed it last year, and called your office quite a lot. It sat on McConnell's desk with the other 418 bills he has. And then at the very last minute in December, they passed it. Well, it was too late because I had already filed mine. Most people do, but your accountant doesn't want you to wait until the last minute.
Well, let's talk about it offline too. But she mentioned there were 418 bills sitting on McConnell's desk. Back when the House was majority Republican and the Senate was majority Republican, in the House they say the Democrats are the enemy, but the Senate is the opposition. Right? That's what the House Republicans say about that, and the Senate Republicans. There's a good rivalry there. But the House Republicans used to say there's 400 bills that the Senate hasn't passed. You know, the Senate must act. They had a hashtag, Senate must act. I was like, I didn't vote for 3/4 of those bills. No, I don't want the Senate to act like, I actually like the fact that the Senate takes longer to pass bills. Now, sometimes it doesn't work to our advantage, but most of the time it does.
Well, case law is an example that should have been passed.
Other questions? Yes?
Is there any way that the president can find a loophole to remove the senior executive service, also known as the deep swamp, the SES, the lifetime employees, Obama's army, et cetera, all of the swamp dwellers who are creating such havoc?
Yeah, so she asked, is there any way the president can find a loophole to remove the senior
executive service.
executive service? That is part of the deep swamp, I suppose.
They are.
I call it the deep swamp, not the deep state.
Yeah.
Kind of just mix the two together, because, and it's real. I mean, those
It
folks
is real.
burrow in, it's almost impossible to fire them, even when they do something wrong. Like Lois
Right,
Lerner, they still
right,
get
right.
all of their pensions.
Right.
James Comey, like, this is a very frustrating thing to us. This is one of the things, in the FISA reform bill, they made it so that people could be punished, but not really. I mean, I don't believe that's ever gonna happen. I don't know. I don't know if there's any way to make it easier for him to fire people or get rid of people, but we need to be able to. I think that's part of the problem at the CDC now. Look, a lot of people are blaming Trump and Pence for various things. The CDC, like 99.99% of those employees are the same people that were there when Obama was president. Do you think just because there's like 3 people that Trump gets to appoint over the CDC that they're gonna be that much more effective?
Nancy Messonnier, or however you pronounce her name, is Rod Rosenstein's sister.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. Other questions? Well,
Yeah, Congressman, I just wondered, it looks like Trump pretty much has got the squelch on the red flag laws overall. Do you know, like the NICS system, we're supposed to set it up to, as I understood the first of this year, to be upgrading the system on like a daily basis or even an hourly basis? And I mean, have you heard anything like that? Because that way then background checks will be that much more accurate than what we've had problems in the past.
no, the accuracy, so he asked about the accuracy of the background checks, the
Right.
NICS system, the red flag law. I do think the red flag law is dead, by the way. That's one of those things, if it's gonna be done, and I hope it's not, that's a state level issue. Like the red flag law bill in the Congress
Right.
was basically bribes to the states to implement a universal standard of red flag. Yes, Sheriff, of course.
The State Sheriff's Association has opposed that red flag bill it's already in the House and Senate now.
Great.
The state.
Awesome. So Sheriff Korsenborn said that the
Kentucky
state
Sheriff's
Sheriff's Association has already registered their opposition to the red flag law. And that's a good thing, because, I mean, they're sending you and your deputies into a volatile situation and not really making it any better at the end of the day, not giving treatment to the person that needs help. And that's the problem with those red flag laws. I don't know if the NICS system will be improved or not, but one thing I do want to say, so people ask me, has the president done anything pro-gun? He did something really pro-gun right off the bat. Obama had passed an executive action or whatever. He had directed the Social Security Administration to basically say, if you receive your check through a representative payee, in other words, instead of the Social Security check going directly into your bank account, if somebody else gets it and manages it for you, then the Social Security Administration, under Obama, under this rule, if Hillary had won, this would be the law right now, or regulation, interpretation of the law, that if you had a representative payee, that they would automatically adjudicate you, and I use that term loosely, adjudicate should involve a judge, but they were going to do it in a bureaucracy and say that you are mentally incompetent to own a firearm. And that was about to become the law of the land. And what we did was we did a Congressional Review Act. We couldn't do this on all of Obama's stuff because you can only do a Congressional Review Act within 6 months of the regulation passing. Well, Obama did it on his way out, and so we did a Congressional Review Act to repeal that interpretation of the law. And when you repeal something that the president does, well, the president has to sign it. Well, the president's not going to sign something that he's actually just done. The only time this little window of opportunity happens is in the 6 months when you go from a Democrat to a Republican. And so we had that window of opportunity, and Obama had passed it in that window of opportunity. So President Trump signed our Congressional Review Act and reversed that order. So now the Social Security Administration is not banning seniors and people that are most vulnerable from having a gun or even ammunition in their house. So that's one very pro-gun thing that they did since he's been president. One other question, and then I want to mingle with somebody. This could be, like, if the state keeps banning all this stuff, this could be the last gathering of Liberty folks. Between now and May 19th, right? So I am glad to share this moment and this air with you. By the way, I was at CPAC. Did you know the congressman that self-quarantined? They were at CPAC. Ted Cruz, Matt Gaetz, a couple others. I was at CPAC. I was one of the 12 congressmen who spoke there. I don't think I met that individual. But I could have said, you know what, I'm going to self-quarantine this week, and I could have stayed in Kentucky. But I realized, you know what, if I do that, I can't go to this event tonight. and by the way, it's been 14 days since CPAC, so we're all good anyway. But anyways, I think I said I would take one more question, and then we'll just hang around. Yes, sir.
So Donald Trump, and there's a lot of pressure now on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. How do you see us avoiding pension crisis with downward pressure on interest rates and people with fixed income relying on those interest rates? How do you see that playing out?
That's a great question. So what he asked was, how do we avoid, so right now the Federal Reserve is going to lower interest rates, okay? If you got a mortgage, that's probably, you win. But if you have a pension, or if you have, you've saved for your retirement and you're relying on interest on your income or bonds or certificates of deposit, you're gonna get hosed. Like, I pointed this out to Ben Bernanke when I first got elected to Congress. He was still in the government, and we had a closed hearing. And I said, you do realize, because my parents and both of Rhonda's parents are retired, they've done the right thing, they saved all their lives, and they're spending the capital, the money that they thought would provide enough interest in their retirement, they're already spending that. And I pointed that out to Ben Bernanke. Like, every time you try to stimulate the stock market, because here's what they're doing when they lower the interest rates, right? They're trying to get you out of bonds and out of certificates of deposit and out of all these certain investments and into the stock market. Well, what does every financial advisor tell you once you get to a certain age? Like, look, if you can't afford to lose half of your net savings and wait 10 years for it to come back, then don't get in the stock market.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're putting seniors in a bind. Like, I pointed this all out to Ben Bernanke, and he was like, yeah, we're going to unwind this at some point, and we'll fix it later. Of course, he's no longer there, and they're talking about doing the same thing. I think it's dangerous. I issued a tweet. I said that the Federal Reserve should self-quarantine during the virus, during this epidemic, because Keynesianism is a virus itself. This belief that we should rob from one generation, a future generation. We've always talked, a lot of you all say this, and I used to say this until I realized what he's talking about. We talk about the debt is going to be placed on the future, right? Like Margot, who was playing the Star Spangled Banner so wonderfully. We talk about, the next generation is going to have all this debt, and they're going to pay for all of the bailouts and stuff we're doing right now. But it's actually the seniors who are paying for this, because when they lower interest rates, they're not just hurting each of your individual investments, and this gets to your point. The pension funds, like Kentucky's pension, it's underwater in large part because those actuaries and those economists had a certain assumption about what the rate of return on money would be. And the Federal Reserve has screwed that up for the last 20 years, and none of those calculations work anymore. And they're going to make them worse right here in the next few days. And so, I mean, I know it's an obscure topic, the Federal Reserve, but this is something that needs to be looked into. And so here's another problem with the Federal Reserve, not to get too deep in this, but the current head of the Federal Reserve was an investment banker, and before that worked on Wall Street. And when he's done being at the Federal Reserve, he'll go back to Wall Street or investment banking. It's a revolving door. And do you think when they get there, they're not helping out their buddies? I mean, they just announced there's going to be $500 billion of liquidity injected into the market for the banks. There are a lot of people going to make a lot of money on that, and none of them are in this room tonight. And so that's the problem. I think we need to get, the federal government needs to get back out of trying to pull all the levers, because eventually you have to unwind all that stuff. Well, I want to mingle with you all and do some more chicken bumps. Before I do, I want to thank all of you. I really do. Like I said, the worst part of this job is, by the way, there are a lot of good parts of this job. Like being able to go to the floor yesterday and expose what they were doing, that makes me feel good, right? To be there, and I challenged yesterday, if you watched my speech, I said, anybody that had anything to do with this bill, come to the floor now and explain why you're not given us 72 hours to read it. Like, come down here and defend it. That makes me feel good. To be able to vote, that you all trust me to vote for the Constitution and to vote for you, that feels good. Being away from my family, not so much, and raising money, that is no fun whatsoever, especially because my family and I pride ourselves on being self-sufficient. So to come and beg during an election, it's not an easy thing, but that's why I'm just so thankful from the bottom of my heart for all of you who are supporting me, because you're not just supporting me. When we win this election on May 19th, we're going to have a victory party, and I hope all of you come to that. It is going to be a blowout. There's going to be another candidate curled up in a fetal position, sucking their thumb. And so think about that day, which is, what, Mary, 68 days? 68 days? Mary sends me a text every morning how many days are left. There's 68 days. We are ahead. We're going to stay ahead. We just produced our first commercial, our positive commercial. And I would like to show it to you all. Like, there are a few of my folks here who have it on their phones. We were hoping to project it on the screen. But I'd like to show you the commercial that we're going to be running. So find Chris McCain or Jonathan Van Norman, and we'll show you that commercial. We don't want it to get out yet because it's kind of another secret weapon. Mind you, it's not just going to inspire conservatives. It's going to trigger the liberals. Okay. Yeah. In the beginning of it, I'm teaching my daughter how to shoot an AR-15. So you're gonna I guarantee you're gonna like this ad, okay? So we'll have that available here tonight, and just want to thank all of you. I want to thank all of the elected officials. Oh, here's the list. I'm going to go through it again, and this is dangerous because Savannah Maddox came here. You weren't here in the beginning. There's Savannah. Give her a Sheriff Korsenborn. Commissioner Kathy Flagg and a redder hat. The lesser hat. Tyson Hermes. Wayne Frolicker. Brian Miller. Meeting Commissioner. Bill Schroeder back here. Not elected, but Colonel S. Hill. And also doing a great job, Judge Gary Moore. Who is, by the way, he was supposed to fly to Norway today, but because of the travel ban, we get him tonight. So thank you for coming here. One last story for the commissioners, and Gary's heard this story before. Gene Snyder was a congressman from Kentucky. Got a call at home one night. She was very upset that her trash had not been picked up. He said, "Ma'am, I'm the chair of the Transportation Committee here in the U.S. House of Representatives, but we don't deal with trash pickup. Did you think about calling your commissioner?" And she said, "Well, of course I thought about that, but I'm not going to start that high up." These local officials are more important than I am to your life. Thank you very much.